awesome. I am one of your hosts, Sami Kinnison, here with our other host, Angela Belford. And today we are joined by very special guest, Dee Maddox. This is yet another NSA connection because Angela is so delighted to be a part of that organization. And there's so many great people there. It just feels like we could just do, a whole NSA podcast only if we wanted to. There's just so many great people
I think there is one.
doing great things. I love it. Dee, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you mind just taking a moment to kind of introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, hey, Angela. Good morning, Sami. Thank you so much for having me. So I am Dee Maddox of DMX Consulting, where we demand excellence to achieve success. And I am originally from Birmingham, Alabama, but currently I've been a resident of Frisco, Texas for the last 14 years. I love my city. So married to young adult children. And I do believe that people are my superpower. I love to connect with people and to communicate. And that's how I got to meet Angela at the NSA North Texas member moment.
Indeed. I love you. It's an organization. Sometimes people talk to me about like, how do you find people to be on your podcast? And I'm always like, you get to join very cool organizations and you just meet neat people. And especially, it's about the business of speaking. So these are folks that are like going around and have some expertise. So it is a little bit of an easy situation, but I was super intrigued because every month they do this thing. It's called Member Moment, where you get to have 8 minutes to kind of give a little bit snippet of your keynote. They choose somebody each month, and so it lets us be able to see what people's expertise is in. And so I was so intrigued. We've talked about perfectionism here on the podcast. You guys may remember our superpower versus syndrome series. If you didn't see that, where we identified that ADHD and imposter syndrome can be your superpower, but perfectionism should probably be labeled a syndrome. And what I love and I'm intrigued about with Dee that we're going to unpack today is this idea of demanding excellence, because it was very forceful, but it didn't feel hustly. That's what I felt like. I feel like so much of our culture that has this hustle mentality, excellence, it feels very strivey, graspy. And what I love is that you talk about it in a way that really is more approachable and feels more settled and like just owning your space. And so I am super pumped to have you here to talk to us today.
I also think that this conversation is super helpful in that we recently talked about, what do you do when you don't feel like doing it? And that sort of is the one side of the ditch of like, I don't feel like doing it. So then you don't do anything. As somebody who's a recovering perfectionist, I so often pushed myself to the other side of that ditch where, I am striving for under the banner of striving for excellence. I would really push myself to perfection to a dangerous point, and to the point where I'm burning myself out. I am overdoing versus the other side, which is almost underdoing. And I'm really grateful for this conversation today. If anything, just so that I can learn. I think that there are times where it sort of feels like, Angela and I have guests on the podcast. And we're like, oh, it's so that our listeners can learn. And I'm like, wait, but I'm a listener too. I'm in that category that needs the wisdom and needs the help. That we're not there yet. We'll never be there. But there's so much that the two sides of that road. Either I don't feel like doing it, I don't do anything, or I'm gonna just do everything no matter what. And that's not always healthy either. And so I think it's really interesting. We're having these conversations so close to each other when it really is the same kind of similar problems, different sides of the coin.
I had not made that connection. Go Sami. Thank you. One of the things, Dee, you laid out an acronym, and I'd love for you to kind of unpack and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my backstory is I grew up in the deep fried South where people were focused on differences, right? And so, like growing up and realizing that people were so focused on differences, it was actually my mother who said, don't worry about all of that, just do your best. And so I didn't really understand why her directive was just do your best. And then if you came home and you did like a B or a C, her question was that your best? And if you said it was your best and that you had put forth your best effort, she was like, well, then that's all I can ask. Next time, you can do better. So I grew up with that thought process and mindset that if you focus on doing your best and you are the best at what you do, then you can minimize people's highlighting the differences.
Mm.
People tend to look for reasons to explain differences. But when you're really good, people aren't trying to figure out what makes you different. They just recognize you're really good. So it's kind of an inside
Yeah.
joke with my brother and I. Like we thought my mother was impossible to please. She's always saying, do your best. But then in the slow thought process of new perspectives that came for me during pandemic, I
Mm.
realized the one permeating theme throughout my entire life, and I had passed it on to my kids. I would say to them on their way out the door every day, do your best and be your best. And that might not always be an A or B, but if you showed up for it and you were prepared and you did your best, then that's all you can really ask. And you're responsible for that. No one else controls that. So, trying to come up with the D.
Yeah. I love that your mom encouraged you to be your best and to do your best because my mom did similar things, especially with grades growing up. And I remember I had one
Mhm.
class that I got a C, almost a D in. And there was like, you absolutely did your best. And I had another class that I got a B in, and I got grounded for that B while I didn't get grounded for the almost D. The reason is that with the C, almost D, I actually was trying my best, and that was the best that I was able to
Mhm.
put forth. With the B, I didn't do my homework. I barely tried. I did not put in the effort. That B, if I had done my best, absolutely would have been an A. And I was disciplined and punished not because of the grade level, but because of my willingness or lack of willingness to put in the effort. And I always thought that was so interesting that it's actually not about the grade. It is about the effort, and how am I approaching the work. And so I think that that's really great. And
I was
my mom was very similar.
Longtime listeners may remember that the first 50 episodes we had here with Josh Belford, and I was actually going to throw him under the bus because I can remember in fourth grade when he loved science, and it was like third or fourth grade, and he got a B in science. And the teacher, when I went in for the 9 weeks grades, was like, I cannot get Josh to stop talking. I can't get him to listen. I can't get him to pay attention, but it's only in the science class, which they were doing this weird thing where there was extra kids. So he got to see his friends wasn't in homeroom with. I don't know, but he got in a ton of trouble for that B and lots of other B's that he never got in trouble for
Mhm.
because it was like I really didn't care. Now, when actually Sammy got to high school, I finally got to the point, she was about 14, 15 years old, maybe 15. And I looked at her and I said, I am going to prioritize our relationship over your grades. Your grades are now your responsibility, and your
Mhm.
grades are going to impact your ability to get a college scholarship, whether or not you do well. And if you have student loans when you graduate college because you didn't get enough scholarships, because you didn't do your get your grades high enough, that
Yeah.
is no longer my responsibility because I want to have a good relationship with my daughter, and I'm not going to yell at you your entire high school career about your grades anymore. So it's now.
Mhm.
So then she would tell me, I would look at her grades and she would be like, but mom, I'm well rounded. That was my favorite quote. She would say, I'm well rounded. She started in marketing way early, y'all. We all do. We all are selling stuff to our kids, our parents. Anyway, all of that kind of sets you up for the acronym that you lay out as far as owning the
Yeah.
ownership that we have.
Yeah. I read the book Story Brand, and it was saying like there are villains and heroes out here in the entrepreneurship business world because I was making the transition from corporate to an individual business owner. And I was like, well, I want it to be something meaningful. Like, what really resonates with me? What do I think about all the time? And I used my initials, D. And so my daughter, by the way, who I'd also pressed this into, do your best, be your best. And she has some ways that she would say similar things like what you just described. And she goes, you could use your name, DEE. And so she came up with demand excellence in everything. But my federal career, everything was always about documentations and processes. So I said, you know what? I said it has to have four. When you think about designing a model, you either want a triangle or a square, like three
Right.
points or 4 points. So I was like, let's go with 4 points and let's make it design, demand excellence in everything you do. And then it'll be the design, education, execution, and documentation, which is really the steps that you take for the ownership, because the deed signifies ownership, like for property. And then if you think about the secondary definition, a deed is an action. So you're taking the
Mm.
necessary actions to be in control of your success. And I use the analogy, would you put the key to your happiness in someone else's pocket? Like the only way you can unlock that happiness, oh, hey, Angela, can I get that key back? No, you hold the key, and it begins
I
with how you design it, how you educate and prepare yourself, like you said to Sammy, about if you have a merit scholarship based on grades and GPAs, because the other factor is need based. If you have working parents, you're not going to qualify for need based. So it's got to be on your individual merits. So how hard you work is going to dictate what you earn. So demand excellence in everything you do by designing, educating, executing, and then documenting that process. And it's iterative. It's not just a one-time thing. It's ongoing. Continuous improvement is continuous growth. And how you get better, you do it more often, more iterations. It's not a certain number of days, not a certain number of hours. The more you do it, the better you get. So whatever this thing you're striving for, you keep doing it again and again, and you determine what that design of that process looks like. So it could be for a project, a program, a goal, a personal hobby. Design it first. What is it that you want to do?
Well, okay. My brain is frying and spinning in a lot of directions. Not frying in a bad way, but just like all the
In good
spider webs are
ways.
going off. It's lighting up. Okay, so in very good ways, yes, because I'm like, okay, so demand excellence in everything you do, which is
Mhm.
beautiful. Way to remember that. But
Mhm.
then there's four steps to this, and so we're gonna
Yes.
slow this way down. We're gonna slow
Okay.
down because I already like
We
wait,
tell them
wait,
what we're
wait, wait.
telling
Let's
them.
back it up a
Now we're
little
going to
bit.
break it down.
We're gonna tell them. Now we're gonna break it down.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Because um I know you did that part, but I was already enamored at that. I think I was already texting you. I want to have you on podcast. Like, and anyway, didn't retain the first time. So the first step of the process. And so when we're talking about this, you're saying if I set out for a goal, if
Mhm.
I set out for I'm going to start a new business, if I
Mhm.
have a project at work, you can follow these four steps, is what you're saying.
That's
The
what I said.
okay, and the first step is to design. So
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit for us.
So design is really the where am I now? What do I want to do? So like if you were doing a strategy or making a plan, you begin with an evaluation of your current level of ability, your current location, your current knowledge level, what resources you might have or need in order to accomplish it. So it begins with the design. So I know that I want to live a healthier life. I'm designing my
Mm.
career as such. So I'm not working a 9 to 5 anymore. I've started a business where my hours are now flexible. So I can
So now
spend
you're
time.
working 9 to 9. I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah, the clock goes around like this
It's an
instead of from here to here.
entrepreneur. Yeah, it's an entrepreneur joke. Just kidding.
No,
Anyway, yeah.
but
Oh,
doing what you love and not what someone else tells you to do.
okay.
And that's
So
the
part of
design.
the design process, you are saying we're going to do a little bit of a SWOT analysis
Mhm.
to kind of see, strengths, weakness, opportunity,
Opportunities
threats.
and threats.
Really?
Yes.
So, because I've got to know what I'm going to need. I like to talk about, I've been working with a client the last few months, and one of them got really frustrated with me one day and said, I don't get what problem you're trying to solve.
Oh.
And I said, oh, there's no problem today, pumpkin. Like, not at all. I am looking down the road and I'm noticing that there's a river ahead. And if we get to that river and we need to cross the river, then we need to build a bridge. And so I'm going to back here, I'm going to buy my bridge making stuff and
Mhm.
I'm going to put it together. I'm going to be ready to put the bridge down if we get to the river. And she's just and so for me that's the way I think about designing the
Mhm.
process is I'm literally using my imagination to go down the road to figure out what might the things that I need. I also talk about future self a lot. So I talk about like think about the kind of person that you will become to have accomplished that thing and now get in touch with that person inside of you because you have it inside of you. And so that would be the design process. Okay, so what's next?
So first you design whatever it is you're wanting to do, whatever goal you're wanting to achieve, but then you have to educate. And very similar to what Angela just said, let's take your analogy of the bridge and the river. You may not know what tools are necessary, or at least you've got to take an inventory. Let's say you really are crafty and you have an entire storage. Do you have everything in stock that you need in order to accomplish the building of said bridge? So you may need to resupply. You may need to acquire new supplies. You
Right.
may need to sharpen your tools. You may need to
Mm-hmm.
get new tools. And if this
Mm-hmm.
was a job promotion or a relocation or a career change, you may need to educate yourself. You may need a new license or a certificate. If it's a life change, you're going to relocate. You're going to scope the new location. You're going to go scout providers and parks and retail and doctors and roads and routes. You're not just going to pick up and move. You're always going to sort of do some preliminary research. So educating yourself on that project and goal is the second step. So designing what you want to do is one thing, but then educating yourself on the way and the steps and the resources and tools that are needed to accomplish it. You have to educate yourself on that.
I think this is what's this very cool. What's bringing up for me is that part of what I'm seeing my value to this client is that there is a tiny amount of education, because what they're asking me to do, I've but is help. They've essentially bought a business, and we're setting on the operations, and I've run a business for
Mhm.
25 years. So the amount of education I needed was much smaller. So therefore I'm moving faster, and they are not. I'm sorry, I didn't know this was going to turn into therapy for me and my
Oh, that's
client.
good.
But anyway, I love this. So, but that is helping me, because then they do need a little more education, and I may need to slow down just a little to make sure that they're feeling comfortable. Just because I know what we need,
Mhm.
I've got to take some time. And so other people may have to educate yourself. I got my life coach certification,
Mhm.
get training, all of that sort of thing. Sammy?
Well, and we talk about the quote that is, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. I feel like this
Mhm.
education point, when you're in a business or an organization or on a project, it it can't just be solo. It can be, what does the team need? Does the team need to be coming together? It almost feels like this education is identifying like the delta from where you are to what needs to change. Um, and where, what is it that you're needing to fill in so that you can get to that other side. But I think that it
Love that.
doesn't, it might be just you, it might also be, where does the group need to grow and learn, and what tools and skills does the whole team need. That's really cool.
Well,
So
and
Sam,
how do you educate them
What's
on the plan, right?
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
Pat Riley, when he took the Lakers to championship, came up with something that he called, speaking of what Sammy said, the team portion, the best effort initiative. He asked each individual player to improve in one area
Mm,
exponentially. So if yours is defense, or if yours is free throws, or if yours is long distance shots, he asks each individual to improve themselves. So when you bring those collective improved individuals together, to Sammy's point, then you're going to have a stronger, better team.
I love
So,
that.
and
Well,
really following the strategy of where am I now and where do I want to go, and filling in that gap. How do I get there? That is the E. So Sammy cracked the code.
I love it. Okay, so then the next E is execute,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Nike said
So,
it best. Just do it. You got to go do it. Once you know what you're going to do, you've gotten all your tools, your resources, you filled in the gap. You now have to have time to actually do it, whether you're riding a bike, whether you're doing the test run, whether you even doing what we're doing today. There has to be testing of the equipment, or a dry run, a road trip. Are you going to do a show? They say, oh, we're going to have sound check. Well, you know the equipment is supposed to work, but you still have to test it and check it and use
mhm.
it in the way that you would when you're actually executing. So design, educate, execute means getting the opportunity to do the steps that you've just.
Oh, 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 oh. I love this so much, because I think that there is a number of people that when they are in the process of setting a goal, I think design could also be decide, decide where you're going, design where you're
Mhm.
going. So oh, I decided where I'm going to go. I'm going to educate myself. Oh, wait, wait, wait. Maybe I'm going to go, okay, now I need to educate. Wait, and I'm going to go, now I'm going to educate. Decide. And they stay in this DE part, and they don't go to execution because
Hmm.
they, lots of reasons, probably fear the most,
Hmm.
is to that they're afraid of failure, afraid of success, afraid of lots of things, afraid of be it looking silly, all of those types of things. So I love that the third E here is execute. But what would you say to people that are, I know we're going to get to the documentation, but I feel like we need to address this. Like, what about people that are like, but what if I don't, if I execute and it doesn't go well? Like, then what?
Or I don't know
All the things
enough.
that you mentioned that people. Exactly. That is an opportunity where you may find maybe you need more skills and more tools. You don't actually have what you need to move forward because there's different levels, kind of like the Goldilocks rule. Too much, too little, and just right. You really have to find that sweet spot, and you can't even know what that looks like. Like when I love the TV cooking shows. You notice they always have a tasting spoon right there. So
Yep.
they've put in the recommended amount, the amount that they think that they need, but it's not until you see them lean over the pot and go, and then they go, oh, and then they sprinkle a little more. So that execution piece is going to give you the opportunity to course correct that. So all of this is around time and resources. You're going to save time and money when you do that evaluation or assessment and discover that it's just not, the recipe's not right just yet. So there is a decision. If I were charting this, it would be a decision point in the flow. Yes or no, or repeat, or and go back
Yes.
to the decision design place. Well, maybe I shouldn't have been going for the hardwood. Maybe I should go with softwood. So you're going back to the design phase because that didn't actually give me the comfort that I wanted, or I wasn't able to carry it as far. So you can return to, and it's iterative. So you can go back to the design phase and decide, to your point, Angela, that you're going to do things differently, and then educate again and then try it again.
I think that's the most critical thing is that until we actually begin to execute, until we actually try, we won't know. So if you sit there and you spend all this time designing, educating, designing before you educate, you may over educate yourself in some area and under educate yourself in another area. And that execution piece is actually, I think, going to give you the best feedback to be able to then make those course corrections. And now, when we go on to the fourth D of documentation, actually documenting the things you tried that didn't work is probably as important as documenting the things that you tried and did work. Talk more about documentation.
Well, the documentation is going to be important because you get to see what the outcomes were. So, how do you know
Yes.
you're winning if you're not keeping score? So, whether you
Mm.
successfully executed or, meet the Robinsons, if failure is good, right? We failed together. But if you don't know how much did I use that time? Oh, maybe, okay,
Mm.
so that time I used 1/4. I'll go up to 1/3. That's a little more. Oh, 1/3's too much. Maybe I need to find something in between. So if you're not documenting the steps, then when you're ready to repeat them, even if they were successful, and if you're a part of a team, to Sammy's point, you can have a team full of valuable players if everyone knows the recipe. But if you have just one person holding on to all the secrets, keeping it to themselves, that's not going to benefit the team. If you're documenting and you can revisit those documented processes, then it also gives you the opportunity to share.
Is there an element of the documentation that is also, you said it, what I thought you were going to finish the sentence. If you have a whole team full of valuable players, if we're not all keeping score in the same way, we aren't going to be successful either. So, yeah, we got to get the recipe right. But if my goal is to maximize profit and somebody else's goal is to ensure we have great customer service, those goals can come at odds, right?
Right.
Because if they spend too much time with a customer making them feel happy, then they're losing money some other place. You could really get yourself, if you're not documenting what the actual metrics that we're following, then you could also like really mess this up and
You
not
could.
win.
And the thing with the documentation is, how do you know you're winning if you're not keeping score? The
Yep.
second key to that is measuring what matters. So depending
Hmm.
on what the design outcome that you've agreed on, because you've already said what you want to do And if you want to improve customer service, then you're going to be measuring customer satisfaction or repeat business or increase in profits. If you want to improve operations and you don't have enough time or you're losing customers because they're walking out, then you want to measure how long it takes you from door to service to the end of the
Mm.
service, like from the time they place their order to the time they get their food. So I eons ago, I was an operator for telephone repair. People would call in to say they were having telephone problems. We had 120 seconds to get people on and off the phone. I never ever met my talk time, but I had the fewest delivery dispatches because I was solving the problem on the front end, which saved the company money. So no, I didn't get it done in 120 seconds, but I had a lot of resolutions. So is your goal here
Mm.
happy customers or talk time 120 seconds? So I'm just trying to prove your point, Angela, that you're absolutely
Yes.
right. It depends on what you're measuring, but you have to measure what matters based on the design that you've chosen. And if you are trying to do two things, then you're going to need two separate recipes. Like that's the bottom line.
I just, my, yeah, so many applications for this. Go ahead, Sammy.
Well, and I think there are so many businesses though that can get really caught up when you talk about, measuring what matters. If somebody is measuring,
Hmm.
talk time, is that the thing that matters
Hmm.
most? Or is resolved
Right.
problems the thing that matters most? And if for some reason talk time is what matters most, you got to create buy-in on why that matters more than saving the company money and solving customers' problems. I would venture to say that there's probably not a reason that you're going to be able to get a lot of buy-in that talk time matters more than solving customers' problems and saving the company money. If for some reason somebody is like, no, no, this really is important because of this, you've got to create that buy-in so that people are like, okay, fine, I will sacrifice these other goals in pursuit of the common mission. And I think that you in trying to get people aligned on where are you running to, it can get really obvious, are we running after the wrong goal? Like, are we running after a goal that's
Yes.
not going to motivate people and that's not going to create
Hmm.
buy-in? When you have to say it out loud, document it, even the like, our goal is to cut the company's bottom line, even at the expense of customer satisfaction. You're like, oh, that's what we're a part of. That's what you're wanting me to chase after. Fascinating. That's
Hmm.
information to know this may not be in aligned
Exactly.
with the kind of company I want to work with. And so, whereas when it's saying, I want to help people and I want to help people in this way, and we need to balance cost, but we also need to help people. And so, I don't know, whatever it is, there's other ways that by documenting that, you can really get good, really clear mission of what are you running after.
It's what you said. The weigh in equals the buy in. So if you're measuring in a call center, for example, like the example that I gave, and your goal is to get the most calls answered, versus if your operations is based on keeping the system in service, resolving the service issue on the front end, am I going to measure talk time because that means I get to answer more calls because people don't hang up and more calls are responded to? Or if we get better service ratings because we resolve the issues by getting it solved without dispatching a physical technician, which is more resources, more time, more money. So to your point, depending on what is your goal, number of calls coming in, the number of hold, they ask you in the old days before they had bots, wait time for customer service. Like now, there's so many menus and options and interactions you can choose to bypass a human. But if there's only this one methodology, this one road that you can take, which means waiting in queue. If you want to reduce the queue and improve the number of calls, that's one thing. But if you want to make sure your customers are happy and resolved before they get off the phone, then that's a complete another. So,
I think thinking through, there's a couple of companies that I interact with, and it's clear that they've done some customer service training, because if they have to look something up on the computer, you know how there's some companies, they'll be like, hold on, let me pull that up on the computer. I'll be back in a minute or two. That is airlines. That is what they say.
yes. Hmm.
But there's this other company and as soon as they start looking something up on the computer, they're like, so how what are you having a good day today? how's your business going? Or, they ask you some question, and it's not like a super in-depth question, but it's just like, it feels more personable to me. And even
Mhm.
now, what's frustrating is there's this one week I had to call that company like 6 times. I'm like, I'm fine, leave me alone. Like, how about you just solve the actual problem? Anyway, resolution is what I really wanted. But when I only have to call them every 3 or 4 months, I'm like, oh, they're just so personable. They're so
Yeah.
friendly. I love
Yeah.
this. Anyway, that's fantastic. So basically, you're saying, go.
I
No,
Oh, I was like, I would like to take a moment though to circle this back to kind of what we said we were going to tee it up on, which is this perfectionism idea. So within all of this, how do we balance that? How do we balance the achieving and the excellence with an overdoing and an overworking? There's no easy answer. But thoughts from either of you on what do we do about that?
I think when you say overdoing it, if you're overdoing the same thing, then you will find yourself heading towards burnout and exhaustion and stress and anxiety. But if you're analyzing along the way where you are and you see that you've been doing it, but you haven't gotten any, if your outcomes or your results aren't different, then what were you doing? So going back to
Mhm.
what Angela said, if you're stuck in a cycle between the education and the execution, or you're just designing and educating, when I started the business, I was seeing a coach and he goes, I noticed something. You love to learn and you love to network. He said, I need you to stop doing both of those. You have all the tools and all the skills you need for this business, and I need you to get busy doing the business.
Wow.
Mm,
I was stunned. I was
Yeah.
stunned. He was saying no more designing because I had already identified what I wanted to focus on. And all of this, by the way, and I'm glad you asked, Sammy, falls under the umbrella of performance management, of managing the outcomes inside of organizations, individual and team and business, making sure that they're aligned. But it has to be built on communication, being able to communicate what the direction is that we're all headed, whether it's resolution, whether it's talk time, whether it's reduced resources, where it's improved profitability, knowing where you're going, to what Angela said, and how to fill that gap, and then measuring what you fill that gap with so that you can do it again, even if the gap looks different next time.
I love that. I say all the time, and I picked it up from someone else, so it was probably Peter Drucker or somebody that says every system gets the results it was designed to get. And so, from my perspective, if you have this leaning toward perfectionism with this, go back and look at the design of the
Mhm.
system, look at your documentation, and see what you're actually chasing after, and is it realistic what you're chasing after? Because most of the time when I work with somebody that struggles with perfectionism, when you slow them down long enough to say, what is the actual goal? And you get them to say out loud, kind of like what you want us to be profitable at reducing. When you say out loud, well, it has to be perfect, then they often will see, oh, I see that's not actually possible. I think some of the things that is a struggle in corporate, and not that I've spent a ton of time in corporate, is that those systems get the results they're designed. And I
Mhm.
think that there is a lot of corporations that actually feed on and water and nourish people's perfectionism
Mhm.
because it is to the advantage of the corporation for me to work 60 hours and feel like I'm never enough and feel like I'm not getting my stuff and that I'm going to have to just keep trying and trying and trying and trying and trying and never getting there because they're getting a lot of extra effort from me.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago when they did the whole like quiet quitting thing, like we held ourselves back from not doing a podcast episode about it because it seemed so ridiculous to us that basically people were just showing up and, oh, you're only doing your job, you're not overdoing your job, you're not chasing perfectionism, and suddenly corporate America is like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And we're like, no, 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 people have decided your system is broke and we're going to rework your system. So awareness is always going to be the key to perfectionism, I think. And then setting down and saying, what is the realistic outcome that I can actually achieve, because it isn't perfectionism. But I love this idea that it is excellence. It is not the other side. to slothery or to, mediocrity or anything, but really just determining and designing what the excellence is.
I also think we've talked a lot of about this deed acronym within the concept of, businesses, projects, organizations, and kind of groups. One of the things that I noticed really early is that it also can be applied to you at the individual level outside of business. How do you want to design your
Yes.
life? How do you want to, what do you need to get there? What education do you need? What steps are you going to take to build the life that you want? And then how are you personally documenting that? That's probably going to look different than a corporate SOP or standard operating procedures,
Mhm.
but it's still important to document for yourself where you wanting to go and then noticing what's standing in the way of that. You want to have work life balance, but your boss says, "Can you work late? Can you work late? Can you work late?" and you say yes every time. That's an area to notice.
Mhm.
Oh, documenting. I didn't This is not the steps that I'm going to take in order to achieve my goals. And I think that understanding where your personal deed on life is different than the business and the corporation's deed. Um, Being able to hold both of those at the same time, I think, really matters. We've been talking this year
It
about how do
does.
you live a freaking awesome life, and I think that this is a method that you could use to design your freaking awesome life.
It is. It actually begins at the individual level. So I know you've done the Covey stuff on speed of trust, and it begins with self trust. So this excellence begins at the individual level. To going back to the Pat Riley and making the Lakers into a championship team, starting with each individual. So knowing what your individual capabilities are and desires and goals, that's going to be the trigger or the mechanism that's going to lead you to every other level, whether it's organizational, whether it's community, whether it's team. It begins with, Angela already said it, the awareness, and it starts with the man in the mirror. It begins right here with you. You wouldn't put the key to your happiness, hold this for me.
Right.
Well, no, what if you're not around when I'm ready to unlock it? Then I need to make sure that I own the components for my individual success. I can't be a successful family member. I can't be a successful community member. I can't be a successful team member if I'm not successful individually. So burnout, and one of the things you mentioned was fear. I think the other thing that we have to talk about is how we handle change when we're forced
Mm.
with change.
Mm.
Was the quiet quitting an avoidant way of handling the conflict of overworking? And if I were going to be completely transparent, I would say that that's exactly what led me to change careers in pandemic, because I was a reformed imposter syndrome person. I was doing twice the work for one salary, and of course they let me. And I
They
no
do.
one stopped me and said, "Oh, guess what? You're actually an analyst. You don't work in HR anymore." Because I had taken a career change out of HR into an analyst role, but I was still doing HR work. No one stopped
Mm.
me. No one stopped me. And I kept doing it and thinking, like, okay, I'm going to make them expand the role. They'll add HR. I'll get to do what I love. I'll just show them how great I can be. So I'll do this one job, all of it that I'm getting paid to do. And I'll do this other job that I want them to create and let them see the value if they were to create this other second role that doesn't exist. But I'm going to do all the work and I'm going to show them all the benefits if it did exist. And I'm going to do my real work. No one said stop it. No one said, don't do
Yeah.
that. Well, when pandemic came and I was home for 2 years and I was only doing my analyst work, and I realized that the thing that I enjoyed most was the job that I had created that didn't exist.
Mm.
Mhm.
Wow.
And that's when I decided to design, going back to Sami, my own life. I decided to design my own job. And that's when I quit mentally and started thinking, I'm going to do this for me and I'm going to go do what I love. I already created it once for someone else and didn't get
Yeah.
compensated for it. So why not cut the pieces I don't love? And yes, I was good at it because I had prepared through education to do the
Mm.
analytical work. But the part that I enjoyed was the people part and the work that I created for myself that wasn't really a part of my assigned role.
I
Love
think the thing that
that.
I heard in that really you showed up for yourself. You decided to stop letting
Mm.
other people sort of take that key. But when you say, don't let other people hold the key, I think a really a more practical application, show up for yourself, go to bat for you,
Yeah.
because other people aren't going to go to
Yeah.
bat for you, especially corporations. A corporation won't go to bat for you. They're not going to show up at your funeral. They're
Yeah.
not, the business itself. People might, but the business
People.
that won't.
Mhm.
People's different. The business
Can't.
go to bat for you. Go show up for
Yeah.
yourself.
And that's the ownership.
And
You you have to own it. You have to own it. You have to take it. You have to do it for you. I had to say, well, if I don't love my analyst job, what is it that I do love? So I'm starting to, so I have my little Russell Crowe Beautiful Mind notebook out, looking at what I'm currently doing, with looking at the pros and the cons. Which part do I love? Which part, oh, but that's not really my job. Well, then I should either go get that job or create that job. And that's what I did.
I love that so much. We could probably talk all day, but we are going to wrap it up. Dee, what words of wisdom would you leave with our listeners today?
I think that there's definitely a difference between perfectionism and excellence. And excellence is based on your individual contribution and effort. It's not about getting it right and keep doing it until you get it right. It's about going in with the outcome in mind and putting forth your best effort to get the desired outcome.
Love
did
it.
you do your best?
We,
Yeah, did you do your best? Show up for you. Well, it's
do your best.
Dee, where can people find you if they want to connect with you and the work you're doing, or just hear more from you?
Oh, thank you for asking, Sammy. So you can find me on all of the social media platforms. So keeping again with my name, Dee Maddox, DMX, my initials, not the rapper, DMX Consulting. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook, DMX Consulting. And you can access my website there to get a free consultation and learn more about the deed. I even have an existing one-pager that you can request, and I'll send you the components of the deed in case you want to design your own process. So DMX Consulting, dmaddoxconsulting.com on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'd love to connect.
We'll put the links in the show notes as well so people can connect. Thank you guys so much for listening today. We're so glad to have all of you here and appreciate all of your kind words and the things that you share with us. It's so great. For now, we hope you guys go be freaking awesome.